So welcome back everybody, this is Paul again from 2012crossing.com, and today I'm going to start a series of videos about one of my favorite subjects is astrology. And a lot of people, when they hear that word, they get extremely repulsive, like, oh, pseudoscience or whatever, and they just whoa. But on the other hand, there are a lot of people who get into it and say, oh my God, what's my sun sign, I want to know everything, and it's just really a lot of foolishness. So I'm going to try to discuss astrology from my understanding. I have studied a lot of astrology way back in college years. I started studying back in the 70s, and I thought it was incredibly interesting. I mean, I was born in India, and I traveled around a little bit, and I found out that there's a lot of ancient tradition regarding astronomy and astrology. It goes way, 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 way back. So I thought I'd start a little series here, and a lot of people have seen some of the videos I made about Sirius and all kinds of cosmic cycles and so on in 2012. But I'm going to discuss this a little bit to help people understand that a lot of what you read in the newspaper about astrology, there's a lot more to it. Just like any subject, if you really want to understand astrology, you have to really, really study it, because it's a very, very ancient, it's extremely ancient. And it's vastly more complex than most people realize. You see, for thousands of years, if you look around in all the different countries all around the world, in Egypt and China and India and South America and Europe, and the Celts and Persia and Greece, and all over the world for a long, long, long time, people watch the stars. And you have to ask that question, well, why did they do that? Because they built very large structures and very, very accurate structures. They had incredible calendars, so there's a lot of evidence that there was something serious going on regarding the observations that they had. And I'm going to try to explore a little bit here, because basically what it comes down to is the observation led them to some conclusions. Because after a while you observe cycles long enough, you start to realize that there's mathematical correspondences. And you notice that those mathematical correspondences, it just so happens for certain times of the year, and you look at where the positions are, and you have the fixed stars, with the so-called fixed stars, where people observe certain stars that are very visible in the sky for a very, very, very long time. Stars like Sirius and the constellations and the Cygnus and so on. There's many, many stars that people observed, and after a while they got to understand that, look, this is quite complicated, because it's not exactly the same time of year. I mean, there's something going on, because after you observe for such a long time, you realize that something serious is involved in the ancient math. There's a mathematical correspondence and ratios to how everything moves in the system that we're in. And regardless of the level at which we're observing it, they had their ways of observing it. And if you look at some of the constructions, for example, the pyramids and all around the world, and Angkor Wat, and it's just so many examples of stunning, fantastic mathematical alignment and observation. What is it about this? They were very, very, very smart people, and they observed for a very long time. And they came up with some very, very, very interesting things. And one of the most profound statements, in my opinion, that's ever been made was attributed to a guy named Hermes, I believe, in Egypt, ancient Egypt. And he said, as above, so below. Or maybe that was Thoth or something. But anyway, it's a very profound statement, because what they realized were there are cycles, and there are repetitive cycles, and then over really long periods of time, there are vastly larger cycles. So if you look at, say, the spin, if you look at very, very large cycles, we're talking about way, way far apart. I mean, that's a rotation that's spread out. And as the funnel gets tighter and tighter and tighter, you go down to the middle of basically what an inverted cyclone. And you have this spin, and it's an evidence all around. If you look at astronomy photographs, you'll see this type of pattern in electricity and so on. There's a spin, that people can observe spin very easily. That's the thing that these ancient people seem to have done. They recognize that as above, so below. If you see spin in water, or if you see spin in wind, then you know that there's spin, there's a speed that happens at the very center of a vortex, and it's intense. But there's a mathematical and a spherical geometry in proportion of how these things spin, and this ultimately led to the conclusions. There's some ratios, and they came up with some amazing, amazing symbols. You have the sextile here, and you have the triangle, very fundamental. You have this demonstration of polarity. You have the contained atom. You have the duality of the moon, the phases. You have the square. You have all these different symbols, profound understanding embedded in a very, very amazing structure along with stories. Because ultimately, when people calculate a calendar, well, what is the right time? Can we just wake up in the morning and say, okay, today's 1 year, we're starting all over from now, and this is the beginning of the, the cycle. So what is the beginning of the cycle? And what they realized that, there's certain cycles that eventually come down to a vortex where something spins and then it goes the other way. Now, that's a very, very profound understanding. And here's one of the ancient symbols, the I Ching. Now, think about that for a minute. It's a very profound symbol. And they came up with it a long, long time ago. The circle of the square and the circle embedded in the square. How spherical geometry is all calculated through their ancient math systems. So what I'm getting at is that people calculated these things for a really, really long time, and they came up to some conclusions that had to do with how the involution and evolution, how things become into, like for example, if you see a lot of conjunction, every so often, for example, we have this Venus that passes over the face of the sun. And it's going to happen in a few days here, on June 5th. And that's amazing. I mean, there are people long ago that observed that and they said, this is something very, very special. We can really set a time on this because it's a rare event. And the more rare the events, that's why ultimately the Mayan calendar and all these calendars say, look, okay, there are times when there's extraordinarily rare events, and those times correspond to the center of the vortex. Because everything is in this rotation. They can see it in the macrocosm and you can see it in the microcosm. And people did things with their consciousness back then. And try to imagine living in a time when the electrical energy in the earth maybe was very, very strong. And you had robust bodies because you're outdoors, very vigorous. So you have very strong physical health and you're outdoors and there was no electrical currents around you and electrical fields and no crappy food. And you were just really, really alert. These people were smart back then, and they came up with a system that's a very, 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 very old system. And I'm going to explore it a little bit because there's a lot of books I can recommend, Esoteric Astrology, Alice Bailey, a Treatise on Cosmic Fire. I mean, there's just many, many authors. You just do a little research. It's a very complicated subject, and there's a lot of different parts of astrology. For example, you have astrology based on the lunar calendar, the solar calendar. You have certain, like Egypt used this rising of the star Sirius on the horizon at a certain time of year. Mundane astrology, calculating political systems and the establishment of organizations and buildings. Personal astrology, orary astrology. Basically what you're dealing with is symbols. The symbol in human astrology, where it involves our psyche, that apparently, if you look at the cosmic cycle, as above, so below, there are powerful currents of awareness moving within us, through the planets, through the whole system. We're just part of it. If we think of ourselves as a separate ego, just walking around, hey, I'm just like number one or whatever, I mean, we're actually just like a blade of grass. I mean, a blade of grass is here for a short time and it's gone, We just take a little longer. So you have to understand that there's got to be some kind of respect for the ancient systems. And I'm going to go into some more in this segment because there's a lot to explore, and a lot of people who view my segments getting a lot of nice feedback. I appreciate it. So thanks again for watching, and I'll go on to the next segment.